So last week we began the study of the book of Philippians, and Philippians is a letter to a church, right? We'll call it a book in the Bible or something, but it's a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the church that was in the city of Philippi. And what we talked about last week a little bit, just briefly, is that the church there was in somewhat of a pressure cooker situation. They were under a lot of pressure, and these first few verses, really a lot of what he says in Philippians talks about the joy we have even in a painful situation. But the first few paragraphs, in a few verses in Philippians, Paul is addressing this pain a little bit, and he's praying for the church. And if you remember, we talked a little bit about, just to give you some context, it's so important to know this going forward, that Philippi was a very dedicated colony of Rome, and so they were really to everything Roman. And they also had a series of networks of people that worked together, the trade guilds, the business community, the families were close, tight. And as long as you were in one of these networks, you would be just fine. You would have a great life. You'd be financially secure. Things would be good. But if you, for some reason, got outside of one of these networks, you would be in trouble. You would lose business. You would lose relationships. It would be a rough time for you. And I was thinking this week, after kind of processing that last week, when we lived in Atlantic Shore, my wife worked at the Chamber of Commerce, and she worked there for a number of years, and they had a very simple system in place. Someone like myself could call the chamber and say, hey, I'm looking for a plumber or electrician, or whatever, it doesn't matter what, a veterinarian, anything. And then the chamber would then refer a business to them. Well, they would only, as chambers refer chamber members to you. So there might be 17 plumbers, but if there's only 3 chamber member plumbers, they will recommend those 3 chamber member plumbers, and they'll do them equally in order, so everybody has an equal shot to be referred to someone. Now, her very first week on the job, someone calls the chamber looking for a particular type of business, and Cheryl followed the protocol that was in place. She referred the next business that was in line and told them they could go to this person for this business. Within minutes, a very angry businessman called up, and he was very upset because someone had called the chamber, his buddy, and she had referred someone who was not a chamber member. Well, what happened is, in the transition of the former person who was in place and she came in, this person that dropped membership, it wasn't noted where it was supposed to, so she had no clue. She was just following protocol. But let me tell you, it raised a big stink in the chamber, and there were meetings and discussions and conversations, and Cheryl was in panic, and she did everything right. It's just that she referred someone who wasn't a chamber member. So it's a big deal even today, all right? I mean, and it was a big deal in the first century too. People take seriously their membership in these trade guilds, in what our current day, Chamber of Commerce or union, modern day, we talked a little bit about last week. And they had that system set up in Philippi. And so as people were pushed out of the networks, it would cause struggle and stress and problems for them. Because of their faith and because of their resistance to Caesar being God and the emperor being the good news and all the things we talked about last week, the Christians were being pushed out of these trade guilds, business networks and partnerships. Even family members were turning their back on them because I'm not going to be associated with you because I don't want this person to think that I believe as you do because you're losing business, I'm going to lose business too. Or maybe a business person won't do business with me, like sell me food or basic necessities. And they don't, so I won't associate with you so they don't think I'm like you. So they're losing friends, they're losing money, they're under a big pressure cooker. And Paul writes to the church and tells them, hey, we're in this together. We're in this together. We're partners in the gospel. I'm in prison. I'm writing from prison. You're suffering. I'm suffering. Things are rough. Things are bad. We're in this together, and God's got this. And he said, God's not forgotten you. But he is going to complete in you what he started. Don't worry. Don't worry. He's not dropped you in this situation. And he says, stay strong and be unified. When you're under pressure, don't start pointing fingers at each other. Don't get angry at each other. Keep your focus. Be spiritual. Be holy. Don't lose your faith over this thing. And then he says in verse 12, we left off at verse 11 last week, he says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. He says, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and that I rejoice. And here's what I want you to kind of focus in on and kind of look at. In verse 12, where Paul says, I want you to know. Okay, we're not going to get real big on this, but the Greek structure of this sentence here, it's structured in such a way that it indicates Paul is really emphatically wanting them to know some important stuff here. I mean, this is really, really important. You guys are suffering, and not only has it past tense, but it still is having this amazingly positive impact on the gospel. And he's saying, I want you to kind of lean into this. I want you to kind of really grasp what I'm about to say. It's not a, oh, by the way, I said this, here's my prayer, ended in verse 11. Oh, and by the way, it's bigger than that. I want you to understand this because this is going to impact your faith, not only now, but in the future, in years and years to come. You need to know this. What's happened to me, the fact that I am in prison for my faith, the fact that I am facing a death sentence, quite possibly, because of my faith, this terrible, horrible predicament that I am in, has actually served to advance the gospel. This is good, he's saying. It is good. Now, if I were writing the letter and I were Paul and I was kind of talking about my situation that I'm in and it's not a very positive situation, I'm really kind of suffering, I would have probably included more gory details. You know, I would have tried to let me pull in their heartstrings. Maybe they can get them to feel sorry for him a little bit. I'll get to the gospel, but let them think about me. Paul doesn't do that. You know, I would have been like, I'm just sitting here serving Jesus. I was just preaching away, and they threw me in jail. Can you believe that? Man, it's really stinky around here. It's terrible. They're probably going to kill me. Can you believe that? And they're not eating very well. I stubbed my toe the other day, and I think that's infected. And have I told you there's no indoor plumbing here? It really stinks. It's just terrible. I would have gone on at least a few details like that. But Paul's life is not all about drawing attention to himself. He's not writing this so they say, oh, Paul, man, you're really in bad shape. He is in bad shape. But that's not his point here. He's a follower of Jesus, and Paul's life is about Jesus. And that's what who's going to write about. Rather than talk about what's going on in his life in this stinky old dungeon, yucky jail cell, he turns the attention to the gospel and says, hey, can we talk about Jesus in this? Can you imagine? Can you believe what's going on with Jesus? Jesus has some stuff going on in this situation that I'm in and that you guys are in, Philippi. God's doing something. This terrible thing we're enduring has this bright Jesus side to it. Now, this is not to make light of pain that we go through. The terrible times that we go through, and we all have them, are terrible, and they're awful, and they're painful, and you feel them. The pain in our lives does not have any less pain, or the difficulty is not any less difficult. But what we are going to see here is that at least the pain that we suffer in life is not being wasted just on pain. There's something to it. And we often look to ourselves and say, what's God doing to me? But Paul here is going to say, it's doing something good for other people. I know it's awful and it's real, and he's not downplaying that, but he's saying, I want you to know the gospel is advancing because of this. This is good news here. And he gives us a couple reasons why he can say the gospel was advancing through the hard times. That number one, that the people are watching and they're talking about it with others. They're seeing what's going on in his life, no doubt in the Philippians' life too, and no doubt our lives when things are happening, and they're talking about it. He says it in verse 13, it's become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. Everybody seems to know Paul's in jail. And everybody seems to know why he's there. It's not because he stole a watermelon at the market. It's because of Jesus. He's been telling the gospel. He's been talking about Jesus. He won't be quiet about it. And they finally just threw him in jail because of it. And so people know that, and they're talking to people that they know about what they know about Paul. So the Imperial Guard is talking about it at work. They're in the break room saying, hey, this Paul guy down here, man, he's you know why he's in jail? Yeah, it's because of Jesus. And they're telling their co-workers and their friends and their family, and they're in turn telling their co-workers and their friends and their family and neighbors. And the word's just kind of spreading. And Paul's going, isn't that cool? Everybody seems to know about Jesus because of this. Everybody's talking about Jesus because of what's happening to me. Now, he like I said, he could be dwelling on the negative stuff, but he's going, this is good stuff right here. People watch. They watch our lives, and they talk about what they see. That's just kind of how it works. Now, it's not always a good thing, right? You've been in a traffic jam before, right? When you finally get up there, you're like, it's just somebody on the side of the road with a flat tire. And everybody's stopping to look. Or maybe there was a car accident, and everybody's slowing down. And they're not like slowing down because they're going to stop and help. They're slowing down because they want to look at it, and they're rubbernecking. And why? Just so they can go home and say, man, it's all an accident. Really? I'm late for my appointment because you had to slow down and see what was going on the side of the road. Isn't that annoying? So people still do it, right? They see the pain that people are going through, and then they talk about it. Now, on the real world, someone might be injured in that accident. Someone's going to be having conversations with insurance companies and attorneys, and someone's going to be maybe going to a doctor, and they're going to have all kinds of pain for the next few days or weeks or months, depending on the situation. There's all kinds of awful things going on, but everybody's just kind of like looking at it. Look at that, and talking. That's just our nature. It's kind of how we go. I found out this week that Chuck Barris passed away, the creator of the Gong Show and the Dating Game and Newlywed Game, did a bunch of stuff. Right now there's real pain involved with that for some people. There's family members who are grieving. I mean, real grief, and tears are being shed. And a funeral is being planned, and details are being arranged, and all kinds of things need to be attended to this. But the family didn't tell me about that. Nobody called me up and said, "Hey, Dan, would you just pray for us? We're going through a rough time. Dad died today, and we're just really struggling." None of his friends called me. I saw it on Facebook from someone else who didn't hear personally. It's just how it is. The word spreads. We see people's pain. We share it with other people, and we talk about it. Now, that's not always necessarily bad, right? I mean, it can be actually a positive thing. We've had tragedies in our life where we didn't go around and tell everybody all the details, like whether we lost a child or a parent died or something. We might have put a prayer request out or something. But there were people we didn't tell personally, who had heard about it, that maybe sent a card or offered a hug or just came and prayed with us and just said, "Man, we're really sorry." Because someone saw what was going on and they talked about it. It's just what we do. It's just what we do naturally. So you might wish that didn't happen. You might try to stop it, whatever. But it was just what happens. What happens. Someone somewhere is talking about what's going on in your world. All right, so Paul was thrown in prison because of the gospel, and he wasn't just sitting around focusing on his situation. He wasn't just down and out and just saying, "Man, this is awful." He's not telling the Philippians how unfair life is and how tragic, his situation is. He's actually celebrating the fact that his pain is leading to all kinds of conversations about Jesus. There's a positive side to this. I hope that's true in my life and in your life, that when things happen and people talk about it with their friends or family or small group or whoever, that they're saying, "Man, but Jesus sure is happening there." I hope that's what's going on. Preachers are good, and I'm guilty of this myself, of saying things like, now this is how you should act. Right? Look what Paul did. Let's act like Paul. Okay. Paul, people are talking about Jesus because of him. So here's how you can have people talk about Jesus in your pain. That's not what I want to do, because I'm not sure that's really what's happening here. Paul's not trying to act a certain way in his pain so that people see Jesus. It's not a show that he's putting on. It's real, legitimate pain that he's feeling. He's not just using it as a gimmick to try to get some Jesus talk in, or as a one-liner type thing. He's not putting on a fake smile to pretend like, "Hey, life's wonderful, so I'm in jail, whatever, Jesus loves me." He's not doing that. He's living through his pain. I think what's going on is he's feeling every ounce of the situation. His body is fully aware of the chains. He's not pretending they're not there. He knows where he's at. His mind is even struggling with the potential of, I don't know if I'm going to survive this or not. We'll talk about that next week. I don't know. I may live, I may not. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where the judgment's going to go on this. And here's the deal. When we go through stuff, whatever it is, it does hurt, and it is painful, and it is real, and it can be deep at times. It can be extremely tragic at times. It just depends on the situation, right? It is not a time for fake faith. It's not a time for us to throw on a fake smile and just try to pretend like everything's okay. Like, hey, just hold on to Jesus, it's going to be all right. That's not a time for that. It's during these times of testing when you are feeling every ounce of the pain, but in your heart of hearts, you know somewhere at the end of this, there is some light. God's going to work in this. God's going to use this. That doesn't mean you have to smile and jump up and down and carry balloons with you, but you just know there's this quiet hope and joy inside that says something's going to come from this. And it's during this time that people are watching and they are learning what it is to be a follower of Jesus, even in hard times. That's actually critical. Because life isn't just always happy. Life isn't always roses. Sometimes it's the thorns too. They're learning how a Christ follower handles pain and failure and suffering in their lives. And they're comparing it to how they handle pain and failure and suffering. And they're taking notes. Whether they say it out loud or not, they're watching and they're saying, what makes your life different? Your life is different as a follower of Jesus. Still feeling it, still living it. It's not enjoyable when you're going through pain, right? But you're going to react differently. When we had lost our second baby, I'm not going to get great details. I've talked about this before, but when Cheryl was rushed into emergency surgery and she's internally bleeding to death, and we don't even know what's going on. It's just whirlwind stuff. And the nurse who worked with us watched us and observed us. We had no idea till later when she told us about this. And we didn't put on a fake smile. We had legitimate questions, and we reacted in a painful type of way. But ultimately, she came to Christ because she saw in our suffering something different. I still don't know exactly what it was. But here it is to this day. We're still friends. We'll talk once in a while. It's 20-some years later. She's still active in her church and serving Jesus, and she's a kingdom person. The gospel advanced because of a terrible situation that we were in. I don't know if what price do you pay? I don't know, but I celebrate that, and I always have. We weren't putting on a show. We weren't choosing our words carefully to let's act like Jesus, people. We just were being real. We were just living our faith, right? So I'm not advising you to put on like a fake smile or to pretend like you're not in pain because people are watching. The reverse of that, has an adverse effect when you try to fake it. I'll never forget the funeral we went to of an infant, a little baby that had died, and the mom and dad were I knew their heart. They meant well. They just wanted so badly to be a testimony to the people and say, see, it's fine. Jesus is great. We're believers, and it's wonderful. And they had these big smiles on their face as they're burying their little infant, and it was so over the top, it even creeped me out. And again, I appreciate what they were doing. I knew what they were trying to do, but I thought, oh, you're hurting yourself. And they did. They hurt themselves through that. It took them so much longer to get through that because they were faking it through it rather than saying, Jesus, be my anchor, and I'm in a horrible, my child just died, and rather than embracing that and embracing God, they just tried to fake it through it. That didn't help anybody, especially them. So be real, be honest, don't overthink it. Whether you want them to or not, people are still going to see how you respond in pain, and they're going to take note in their minds. As a follower of Christ, I don't even know, I don't know how to define this. You just simply will react differently because of that inner joy you have, that inner peace you have in God, and rest in that. It's that difference that we have that advances the gospel. And that's what Paul is celebrating. A second way the gospel advances from our pain is that fellow believers grow in our pain. It's kind of odd to think about it, but people were encouraged by Paul's suffering. People were encouraged by the Philippi's suffering. People are encouraged when you and I suffer. Not that they're glad, right? But there's some encouragement. In verse 14, it said, most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, they became confident in the Lord by his imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Now, you would think Paul being thrown in jail would make most people kind of clam up a little bit. This is like, man, okay, it's not good to talk about Jesus. Don't be a Jesus freak, just kind of be religious, right? But his imprisonment actually encouraged them. The way he was handling his imprisonment was a challenge. It was encouraging people to say, man, I can do that too. He's just Paul. I know him. He's just a dude. I'm just a dude too. I can do that too. And people are becoming more bold in their faith and sharing their faith. Sounds crazy, but it does kind of work that way. I'm sure I've told you this. You know what inspired me to be a church planter, don't you? Back when I was in college, every year they would parade these church planters in front of us. From the one chapel service a year was dedicated to the CEM, Christian Evangelical Mission, would come in, and the church planters would come in, and they would tell their stories. And oftentimes they're rough stories. I mean, they're challenging, they're difficult. What is it, 4 out of 5, I think it is, churches that get started fail. I mean, most churches don't make it, that get planted. And these guys would come in and they would tell stories how they don't know where if they're gonna get paid this week or next month, or it's been 3 months since they've been paid, and that the church doesn't know if they're gonna survive from this week to the next. It just depends on this week's offering. We had all these situations. I mean, there's just horrible stories that are coming in, to the point that most of the people in the chapel would left going, man, I don't ever want to plant a church. That's crazy. I would never do that. And I left every year going, man, I'm going to do that someday. That just sounds cool. To Cheryl's, unhappiness. But their pain inspired me. To want to do that sounds weird. I know. I don't know if it's a personality thing, if it's a faith thing, if it's just a little bit of crazy. I don't really know what it is. But those stories of people going through really hard times inspired me to one day go out and plant a church. And then it hit me this week. I'm looking at the calendar. Do you realize it is this week, 15 years ago, this week, that the core group began at Pathway Church? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. 15 years. And then in October would be our grand official launch. So we need to plan a party or something for October, right? I mean, somebody write that down. Let's do something. Let's do it big. Because most churches don't go that they don't survive. They don't survive. And somehow, don't get me wrong. It's not like it's been roses, So, there were lots of times we wondered, we're going to last another week. What's going to happen? And so we went through almost all those stories that I heard in college. But here's the deal. My point is not how cool we are, wonderful. We're not, because we were just whatever. So we are. My point is there are going to be a lot more people in heaven because Pathway Church was born, because of the stories that inspired this church to be born. I think about that. We've had a ton of baptisms over the years. There are people today in heaven because of Pathway Church. There are children right now on the other side of the globe in Zimbabwe being fed and clothed and educated and taught leadership. And they're going to change a culture over there because of Pathway Church. I just for fun looked at our studio online presence. We do little radio programs and stuff. We're about that far away from 1 million views on from just some little church here in Johnson, Iowa. Doing something from we have various things we do up in the studio, and there's going to be a lot more people in heaven in years to come because people like you and I, right, have come from, been inspired by some of these stories that happened 20 years, 30, well, the 80s. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? But the stories that were originally heard back then led to an inspiration. And that's not, there's lots of churches out there that people heard the same stories and went out and started churches because they just inspired them. The pain sometimes that we go through will inspire others. And we're going to continue to share our faith as a church, and we're going to continue to invite our friends, right? Because of those few families back in the 80s that were suffering, and it inspired myself and others to do this. Those guys have no idea the impact they had. They were just coming in, doing their obligatory one chapel service, but the gospel advanced because of what was going on in their lives. So let me encourage you, okay? This is really the point of today, the point of the scripture today. Let me encourage you. I know that we all go through difficult times, and they're hard to go through when you're going through them. And we all have them. We all have them in different times. But just know that while we're often looking at what God is doing for us, making us stronger, building character and so forth, He's doing something more than that. Be encouraged that He is actually blessing other people through that He's not only making you stronger, but there's this ripple effect that happens as people observe your life and see what's going on and see how you're getting stronger and seeing what's happening in your life. He is advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ in ways you may never, ever know. You just may never know. And so the next time you go through that, the pain is going to be real. It won't diminish that, but let there be some joy in there thinking, well, God, just use this for something, for somebody, somehow. God is not going to waste your pain. He's going to bring some type of growth for the kingdom because of it in ways you may never know. I think that's encouraging. Would you stand with me? Let's pray.